Whoever controls the data controls the keys to the kingdom. Just imagine the way AI being weaponized. And now they can use this AI weaponization to target users as well AI systems and apps and services. I'm not saying you can take it like 100% away, but you can definitely reduce and increase the security posture from 70 to 90%. And that is in effect in itself is a good step towards like securing these scenarios.
It sounds a bit bleak, and actually it sounds a bit expensive. What does that mean for the CISO? How do we solve for this without having, increasing budgets? Welcome to Orange Cyber Defense. I'm Ajay Bhardwaj, and today we're looking at AI on both sides of the cyber fight, on defense and in attack. I'm joined by Dr. Aditya Sood, VP of Security Engineering and AI Strategy at Aryaka. Aryaka is a leading provider of unified SASE as a service. Aditya, thank you for joining us here at Orange Cyber Defense today. We're here to talk about AI and its impact on the cyber landscape. It is having a significant impact, both from a tools, techniques, and procedures perspective. For our CISOs out there, what do they need to be concerned about from an AI-driven perspective?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Ajay, for having me here. I think it's a very fantastic question at the moment because when we talk to CISOs primarily, we go deep dive into like understanding the AI taxonomy first and why that matters. Because this field is very wide at the moment, but from a CISO perspective, when they really need to go into the enterprise-based security matrix, right, they really need to dissect the problem, which we call as formulating a problem. Mm-hmm. For example, there are attacks that are targeting AI. Then there's a AI being used to target AI. Cool. Then there is another problem for enterprise users, how they're interacting with AI apps and services. So considering all that in a nutshell, the CISOs need to understand what problems they are facing. Right. Because at the end of the day, if that granularity is not achieved, I think it's a very tough problem to solve because you cannot just go in a random manner and apply and buy products and then deploy them, right? One of the most important part what we're seeing is the enterprise users interacting with the Gen AI apps and services. Right? The risk is pretty much high. And the way they are dealing with right now is like a data leakage and exposure is a big, big concern. Okay. And why that's so? If you look at the scenario, what we're dealing with, like all these AI apps and services, people are interacting at a faster rate. Mm-hmm. So the visibility is very important aspect of it. What the CISO is going to do if they don't know what their users are doing. Right. So user behavior analysis with respect to AI apps and services is a very important artifact. And once they do that, they really need to come up with like what kind of prompts they are actually using to interact with that. And that matters because these prompts can carry a lot of data. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about them, the concept of authorization boundary comes to play. And that is a very important aspect of it because the data has to stay in authorization boundary that enterprises define. Of course. If they go beyond that authorization boundary, I think that's the challenge is there. And I think that's where when we're dealing with the third-party LLMs, mm-hmm. whether it's a large language model, small language models, any kind of thing, data crosses that authorization boundary. And once it does, we don't know how that data is being handled. And it goes back to the same scenario of, when LLMs are being designed, what is at the end of the day they are doing? Right. They are processing the data, training data set, artificially generated data sets from all ways. So there's a lot of variables and parameters are generated out of it. So that's what I used to say when we talk about CISOs, right? You need to be very careful how you sketch your authorization boundary. If you do it well, then you can actually reduce the risk and exposure. But data, as I used to say, data is whoever controls the data controls the keys to the kingdom. Absolutely. So I think that's where we are right now. And that's what CISOs are facing, one of the important problems.
It's a really interesting idea about effectively proactive exfil, right? So you've got people in the organization without realizing exfilling their corporate data out into public LLMs. Yeah. So let's just talk about, if we can just develop that a little bit further. Is that now becoming the domain of the CISO, i.e. who owns the LLM, what access people have to a large language model externally and internally, what they publish and where? You're talking about data leakage. Yeah. You're talking about those data boundaries. Can you explore that a little bit more? Yeah,
absolutely. As we just discussed about the AI-based taxonomy, right? So let's say dissect this problem into two mm-hmm. parts, right? The first one is like public LLMs. The second one is like, internal in-house developed LLMs, right? For both cases, the data authorization boundary differs. Right. But when you say like, when the CISOs come to play, right, and they look into like how users are interacting with apps and services, just think about it. At very first step, when we talk to them, we need to understand the threat actors that are evolving in it. If we talk about users or employees, they can be malicious in nature, but they could be erroneous in nature as well, right? Sometimes they make mistakes. For example, if you look at it like uploading some sort of document to the external third-party LLM for processing and getting some kind of it's a huge document. They're gonna get like a gist of it, and they just upload it, but they don't care about what kind of data resides in it, right? So that might be an erroneous employee problem, but there are also malicious actors, and I'm gonna target this problem finally into the internal LLMs. Take about an example of a model inferencing attacks, right? You have your own in-house LLM, and then attackers or malicious employee gonna interact with it. So they're playing with the prompts. The idea in this case is to, in a general sense, is reverse engineering the LLM through prompts. So when they are injecting prompts, they are injecting certain kind of queries, playing with a lot of feature set of there, and trying to figure out how LLM operates, like the kind of variables, parameters is operate on. So that actually gives them the idea, okay, these guys are in this state, like these deployed LLMs. But at the end of the day, what they're looking for is bypassing the guardrails that have been deployed, because then they can go for, harnessing the power of LLMs that much more being there as opposed to there should be. So in this particular case, in both scenarios, the first one is malicious users, the other one is erroneous employees. Both threats we need to take care. And that actually going to fall into your risk assessment framework when the CISO is going to look into it. And I think that's where the granularity and the taxonomy matters a lot, because you go very granular and understand what kind of policies you need to enforce, whether it's a security level, network level, or in a hybrid.
And that's proliferating very fast, and actually getting control of those LLMs becomes really important. And actually, I think you talk about we need to have policies around that, right? You need to have policies and controls around it. That's ChatGPT-esque type queries. There's malicious and there's just erroneous behavior. What about beyond that? I mean, AI is impacting us everywhere. And yes, ChatGPT and other aspects of AI are easy to access. But actually, AI in the hands of a malicious user is much more than just how you access an LLM, right?
Absolutely. And what we are seeing right now, apart from the research that we perform, look into different kind of attacks that we have performed and understanding different threats in the wild. I think one of the most important part is that with the weaponization of the AI. I mean, it starts with the worm GPT, then we have a fraud GPT, and many variations of that. But if anybody studies the underground cyber economy, they will come to know the kind of tool sets that are being deployed these days. It's they are created a GPTs without any guardrails, but it can actually do the task for you. But in addition to that, I'm talking about legitimate services, legitimate LLMs, GPTs and all that, right? Even attackers are come up with a way when they test those, for example, ChatGPT, Gemini and all that. Sometimes they can circumvent the inherent guardrails and try to force the LLM to work in a specific way. And that is a very important aspect of it. And I can explain you on that. For example, polymorphic code generation. So let's understand, an attacker want to launch some kind of targeted cyber attack. There are 5 phases: reconnaissance, initial infection, command and control, data exfiltration, and then goes beyond that, right? For every single stage, you can utilize power of the LLM to generate code. And you can make it polymorphic in nature. Like every variation, there will be a new code. So if you map this problem into the context of arms race, where adversaries are there and defenders, right? At the end of the day, whoever going to utilize these LLMs in a better fashion, going to make a mark. And I think that's where we are. And that's where these LLMs are being abused for generating this kind of code. For example, so you can say that you can generate it code for every single stage. Now you can launch a targeted cyber attack. You can still ask LLM to create a very fantastic phishing email for me, and then you manipulate it a bit and then send all those things together and all that, right? And in addition to that, if we talk about water holding attacks, they will come up with a different kind of polymorphic code, as I said.
Sorry, can you explain water holding attacks? I'm not sure.
So the water holding attacks is let's say a particular big brand is there that gets compromised, for example, example.com, right? And then they host a malicious code on it. But by default, because users are visiting it because of the brand and the trust there, they get infected on the fly.
I see.
Right?
I see.
Either can be
just by the nature of the fact that they're engaging with that. Okay.
So for that injection that are happening into that, either via CDN or any kind of other networks, that code can be generated on the fly through LLMs.
Got it.
Right? And that can be very, very specific, neat code and hard to decipher. So every time it executes, downloads via browser, it executes in the memory, so you don't need any traces on the storage system. So all I'm trying to highlight here is that just imagine the way AI being weaponized. And now they can use this AI weaponization to target users as well AI systems and apps and services. So we are into very, weird way of like world right now where AI is there. Of course, we need to enhance the productivity, but the threats are real as well.
So it's a tough world for the CISO. They're governed by policies, regulations, laws. The adversary isn't. So they're not governed by anything. So they're moving at pace. The CISO has all of these controls. How do we work in that environment?
I think from the CISO perspective, they need an amalgamation of the understanding of both adversaries and defenders at the right time. They need to understand what adversaries are doing, how they're abusing the technology. Once they understand that intelligence, they need to get back into the defender mindset, which means like they have to dissect the enterprise into a smaller set, understanding the problem, formulate it well, and then appropriately look into the visibility and the discovery of a lot of artifacts that are being hidden inside the network from the adversary point of view. And once they do that, the intelligence is there, then they come back within a very structured and applied methodology, which they can actually go after and apply to solve all these kind of problems one at a time, not to tackle this problem in a one go, because that's not the arms race. The way you're going to handle it is gonna go for step by step and take it from there.
Okay, got it. Now, I'm going to ask you one last question on this, because as I speak to you more, I get a little bit more worried for our CISOs. My question is this. If things are moving so fast with AI that we can hardly keep up with them, how do you build a threat model that keeps up with the rate of change of AI? Because it's not human change. It's not going at a human pace. It's going at an automated pace. How do we keep up? How do they keep up? How do they keep a threat model up to date? How do they ensure that they're looking at the right things and they're prioritizing in the right ways, right? So when I think about urgency for a CISO, how do we determine what they should be looking at from an urgency perspective?
Just a question, pretty good one. So, and I think it needs discussion as well. I think if you look at it from the perspective of CISO, the way, the things are evolving at a faster rate, right? Even in AI apps and services, we need to deploy and develop some kind of continuous processes. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, any enterprise user who are interacting with AI apps and services, how they can do that? They can only possible when the enterprise has allowed it. I'm not going into like a shadow AI at the moment. I'm just going up like an approved set of AI apps and services.
Okay.
I'm asking these days to many CISOs and all that, how often you are performing risk assessment for those AI apps and services? Hardly. And because see, you are not understanding the concept right now, because when these services enter into your arena, the authorization boundary again changes. So you need to know beforehand when you are actually interacting with these AI apps.
Okay.
Basically, you're deploying those AI apps and services. What is the risk assessment framework for that? What are the standards that you're operating on that? Like any new service, this is what we need to do. And I think that's the point that the majority of the CISOs are missing these days. There's a well-structured AI-based framework need to be added into your existing security policies. Okay. From there onwards, you have to, before you make any decision of like, in fetching these services inside your own environment, you need to assess the risk posture. And then you have to have some kind of training also available at that point of time, like what you should be doing with those AI apps and services. You just cannot go blind and throwing prompts and asking for anything. That's not viable. And for example, take an example of a RAG framework when we have, right? And then these guys say fetching the content from outside the world, when you are building the responses and interacting with the kind of prompts that are being sent by the user. So there's amalgamation happening for like external data and already preserved data state. Absolutely. Right? At that point of time, how often you are talking about, right? What kind of responses coming from a particular website when they are searching. It's a search capability that injected with the directive, the LLM operations. So all I'm trying to highlight in this case is like from a CISO perspective, the rate of change that the AI is evolving, you also need to deploy continuous processes. And that means like every single stage, right from the start of like inheritance, like AI apps and services, to the consumption, and then to the next level, the way you are deploying it, developing it, for all those kind of things. So the consumption model and the security around that consumption model need to be continuous in nature at the moment.
Wow. Okay. So as it is a new world for all of us, it is definitely a new world for the CISO. They have to think differently. They have to be much more dynamic in the way that they're approaching things. That's really interesting. What about shadow AI? That's just as big a problem as everything else.
Absolutely. And I will try to, stick to this problem a little bit, explain in the context of mobility as well.
Okay.
Take an example of like a bring your own device play, right? I mean, enterprises have to do it. There is no other way out, right? Sometime earlier we have like mobile device management still going on. They're managing these devices. But when these devices enter into your enterprise sphere, right? Get into that boundary and all that, right? They are carrying several set of AI apps and services that are running on their mobile. The network is the key, but the network is the enterprise one at that point of time. When they're doing so, all the data that is being traversed through the network is through the enterprise network and getting into the source, primarily any servers that these AI apps are running on or fetching the data from. At that point of time, from CISO's perspective, the standard operating procedures for what they have actually deployed might not work because these devices are coming in and out of the system on a regular fashion. So how are you going to make sure that what kind of policies need to be deployed or configured primarily when these devices enter into the system? So that is entirely different from what is being running already, the simple IT laptops that are being there, that are accessing those AI apps and services. Now, when we sketch this problem on a bigger sphere, we talk about risk assessment of the approved AI apps and services. Here we are talking about the shadow AI problem that is being these devices carry with them because then they have no clue.
Absolutely.
So from the classification to the understanding of that, how you're interacting with the application and the policy formulation, all these are three big steps that need to be undertaken by the CISO. Because certain times when these devices come into the board, into the network, like the classification of those AI app services, nobody knows about it. Right, what kind of this particular app that is running on mobile A, right? At that point of time. So they need to perform proper classification. How they do that? Of course, they need to build databases. They need to build several storage, fingerprinting of those apps and all that. But it is a problem that we are facing on a regular intervals of time. And to solve this kind of problem, we need a different methodology as well. And I always used to say there's just additional artifacts we need to include into our standard design practices. For example, prompt risk assessment, right? People are interacting with these AI apps and services when they are actually doing it, like what kind of prompts they are generating. That's the first part of it. But when there are certain kind of automated execution flows that being triggered, then the classification becomes very important, like, where that is being hit. Right, and what kind of classification is there, and if you have a good classification policy, need to be enforced. So it is not as easy as it looks like. It's a very tough problem, but again, the step-by-step based approach actually help us to reduce the risk. I'm not saying you can take it like 100% away, but you can definitely reduce and increase the security posture from 70 to 90%, and that is in itself is a good step towards like securing these scenarios.
We know CISOs are in trouble with AI. What are the 1, 2, and 3 things that they should be focused on?
Absolutely. The first one is like they really need to look into the data exposure leading to data exfiltration of their enterprise network, understanding the concept of authorization boundary, ensuring that they have control over the data. And if it is bypassing the boundary, they need to make sure that data is in fact filtered and should not go into their exact source. The second one is primarily looking into the attack surface expansion. They really also need to go detail into it, what kind of attacks that are being targeted against AI and how AI also being used to launch different set of attacks against users and AI apps and services. Third one, very important aspect when we talk about in the context of adversaries and defenders is the skill set. Right, the gap understanding about AI technology leading to the core and how you can actually further adversaries are abusing it and understanding of that intelligence and then building defensive mindset out of it. I think that's where we are lacking. I think these are top 3 problems that we are dealing with on a regular day-to-day basis, but need to be solved as soon as possible.
You mentioned authorization boundaries. It's not a term I'm particularly familiar with. I think I get it, but can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I refer to the authorization boundary, I refer to the concept of the perimeter that is sketched about related to the data, typically enterprise data. So when you enforce security policies, you actually go after creating a perimeter and ensuring that, if data stays inside this particular perimeter, a boundary, then the security policies are enforced and you can ensure that the risk is reduced, right? Because it's in your control. As long as boundary is breached, the data moves out like, for example, uploading a document and all that going to third-party services, the risk is enhanced because the boundary is breached. So when we talk about authorization boundary, we actually look in from a design perspective, like, data needs to revolve inside this particular boundary. And that actually gives you a better picture about your enterprise environment.
Perfect. Thank you. We've talked conceptually. Now let's talk about how it is on the ground. What's the most significant AI-enabled attack you've analysed in recent months?
I think what you just said, we are talking about the context of AI-enabled attacks, right? The most important one, as I discussed, touched a little bit earlier as well, but I want to expand on that as well as the utilizing the AI to draft malicious code in a different aspects of a targeted cyber attack. And why it is important, because from attacker perspective, earlier they have to draft down the whole code sitting there for months and months. Now what they need to do, they need to figure out, okay, I got a way to bypass through prompt injections the guardrails that these guys have developed. And if I can do that, I can let them generate the code which I want. All they have to do is they don't have to let them generate a code, like a full-blown code in a one way. What they can do is go into component-based model, dissect it by component easily. You generate 50 lines of code, which is and then add more security mechanism on the top of it, anti-detection mechanisms, I would say, polymorphic in nature, obfuscation, and all those kind of things. Encryption as well, right? And then code is built for every single component. And then you join all those components together to structure a well-targeted cyber attack, and then utilize public-based services of the AI as well to do that. And that is what we are seeing in the recent one, the way Claude has been exploited. They actually utilize the power of Claude to build a complete threat, campaign, launching targeted cyber attack. And it was a pretty interesting and fantastic one. Every single work has been done by the LLM and the AI that they are being consuming by harnessing the power of it. But I want to raise this concern a lot, because of the social engineering aspect of it in every targeted cyber attack that is happening. In the context of social engineering, if you remember, in the way SMTP is being abused for many, many years, and the phishing attacks are being done. Even the AI, they have actually, created a new variants of phishing attack that you can actually very closely create, the way human write the email and then do it, right? And then, of course, modify it with different kind of links or attachments and then send it across. But think an example of we live into the world of too long didn't read, right? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then think about deepfakes, right? Audio and visual, right? It's a psychology play. The audio and visual impressions live for a longer period of time. So they are actually weaponizing the AI to create fake messages. Earlier, we used to talk about, for example, CEO spoof email. But think about a CEO spoof deepfake message and all that. And it's being spread all across through social media networks or internal networks and all that. And people say okay, my CEO is asking for these things or CFO is asking for these things. I need to do some sort of thing. So at that point, a 30-second attack is much more devastating as opposed to what we have in phishing, because you need interaction with it.
Right.
I'm not saying you don't need interaction, but that interaction with the phishing email, interaction with the deepfake message is way different than the psychology is being operated.
It's interesting because we actually, my team pulled a stunt on me actually for a press release earlier last year. It was interesting. It was a deep fake. The question I have on this, and this is really interesting as you call this out, there is this now renewed interest in deep fakes and how we can be impacted by them. But AI on traditional attack vectors like phishing, I mean, that must be employed as well. And so I think, do we really have to keep our guard on the traditional and the new? Or is it really just worry about the new? Because the traditional, we've got it covered.
I think I was used to say old habits die hard. We need to first make sure that the traditional set of attacks, how AI is advancing them, need to be understood well. But we cannot just shut our eyes and looking at what the new advancements that are happening with the new vectors, right? Just imagine, if you have to draft a phishing email, which looks we have conducted these simulation attacks, I'm talking about 10 or 15 years back. It took close to many hours to draft it completely, every single pinpoint. But right now, within a 30 seconds, you can draft so many different variations through LLM.
Yes.
And just imagine you're launching all that attack in a distributed manner. It just flux, right? And the users are bamboozled by all those things. These phishing emails are coming. And out of 10, they might interact with 2 or 3 more, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where the infection. But the point here is that AI has actually weaponized it. And with the way they are doing it, the scalability aspect of it is much more to the next level. And I think that's where the transition, I would say, the happening at the traditional set of attacks, the way AI is impacting those set of attacks to the new set of attacks. I think we need to look into the bigger picture altogether and making sure that, of course, these things need to be taken care of, right?
Absolutely.
And then go to the next level. And that's why I think the job for CISOs is a tough one these days, because all these things are coming in a one go with a shorter period of time with a bigger scalability. And I think that's where the problem is.
Where are defenders losing visibility with all these new attack vectors that are going on right now?
Yeah, I think there's a very fantastic questions in the context of the constraints that defenders are facing, right? And when we talk about attackers or adversaries, right, these guys are interacting with LLMs without guardrails, right? They are actually harnessing the complete power of LLMs without any constraints. But when it comes to defenders, right, they are actually going after with a constraint approach, right? Because they say, okay, the guardrails these LLMs are using, what kind of intelligence I can extract out of it. That's why the threat intel in the context of, different LLMs that are, being deployed or malicious actors are using, that intelligence need to be gathered from different channels. And those intelligence sets need to be inherited into the existing set of the intelligence patterns that defenders are using. So we need an amalgamation of both those intelligence patterns.
Right.
Because otherwise the visibility won't be there and they don't have a complete 360-degree picture.
Absolutely.
And if they don't have it, there's no way you can actually, subvert those attacks or combat these AI-based attacks. At the end of the day, if you look into the context of like a penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, as apart from the enterprise security point of view, we also need to assess these LLMs from that vector, right? And that actually also generates a lot of intelligence because you find bypasses, you find other things, and then you say how attackers can actually further abuse them.
Okay.
And then use that intelligence to build your own variables and parameters that you can enforce through policies and stuff like that. And I think that's where we are. It's just the way it's all going to boil down to the same arms race. And that's why adversaries are a little 2 steps ahead as opposed to defenders, because they are playing on an open playground. And defenders, they are just a little bit constrained through all these kind of facts and vectors.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. The follow-up question is this. It sounds a bit bleak, and actually it sounds a bit expensive. So budgets for CISOs are getting tighter. Yeah. This feels like it could be a proliferation of budget requirements to keep up with the adversary, as you called out. What does that mean for the CISO? How do we solve for this without having, increasing budgets?
Yeah, I think this is a very practical, problem, considering when it comes to cost and all that. And I take a step back and I say, even from the CISOs, like looking into the sphere of existing set of policies and processes, how we can actually inject AI-related processes directly into it. Right? See, 24/7, you're running a SOC. Right at the end of the day, but you can also look into I have these particular apps and services. I'm looking into these enterprise users. Why not to actually set up a baseline for AI apps and services? Again, see, at the end of the day, these are cloud-based services. So you really need to enhance and inject some sort of another classification into it. Okay. And the same structure is there, same infra is there. It's just like a more visibility into different parameters and network traffic that is flowing into it. When I talk to CISOs, I always say we need to enhance the existing set of processes. It's just not something like, a clear-cut indication like you have to go different tangent, right? At the end of the day, it is simple infusion of some benchmarks related to the AI to do that. Don't categorize this problem into completely a new product need to be injected or deployed into your environment. That's a separate case. But prior to that, you can actually enhance your existing processes to, overcome this obstacle and then, at least get to the certain kind of posture where the risk is minimized. And I think that's how we actually solve it.
CISOs are looking across their organizations to help them understand how to solve these problems. What should they be asking their own SOCs to monitor for, to solve and see early indications of these problems?
So I think this is a very neat question and a very important one. I think from the CISO perspective, they actually, when they're kind of like a security benchmarks that have been defined, and the SOCs are actually adhering to it in the context of the AI and all that, right? The very important part, we really need to understand the deviations that are happening in the standard network traffic. They're a very important part because see, when AI is being weaponized, these attacks are happening at a very rapid pace. So the deviations gonna be huge. When I talk about deviation, I'm talking about there's an upsurge of network traffic and a lot of those things, right? But in addition to that, your standard set of heuristics, signatures, and other intelligence patterns are not kicking in. Because at the end of the day, the way they have used like polymorphism, obfuscation, and all that, the network level traffic, they are not good enough standard intelligence where variables or parameters are available that actually detect that. So you need to see deviations in this context, not like a standard network deviations and all that. If these are happening at a rapid pace, for example, take like, you have a critical services and then somebody's launching like SSS scan on the exposed, SSS service. You need to see like how exactly those attacks are being triggered. Is it like triggered for one go and gone, or it's being continuously triggered for a long period of time? So that actually highlights the frequency in that deviations actually gives you a better picture of like, some sort of how attacks are being triggered. It could be a denial of service. It could be, standard scanning attempts, reconnaissance and all that, right? And that is the one part of it. Second part is that when they're analyzing a malware, some sort of it, like using AI for weaponization, and then finding it out, like most of the time when this code is being, already run in the memory as opposed to leaving traces in the system. So anytime that is your browser show deviation, and then say code is being run and it's in the memory, infection starts, and then you suddenly see a network traffic being triggered to the remote source, you can clearly sense it out. This is some sort of like advanced level of attack. Traces will be there, but your standard intelligence vectors won't trigger because there is no trace on the system, on the operating system, right? So these kind of deviations, so that's why I use the bigger term deviations here to encompass everything into it, to just kind of go for it. So these kind of things, right? Another one is like understanding the user behavior. That's how, in fact, the users are interacting with Gen AI apps and services. Right. And there is like, as I use the term a lot these days, like prompt risk analysis. You have to analyze, extract those prompts and see how many of those prompts are triggering, some sort of deviation. And then actually give you a better picture and all that. So we touch on the topic of infrastructure level, browser-based attacks, and then enterprise user-centric. So considering all that in a nutshell, I think these deviations need to be understood well because of the frequency and the speed.
That's really interesting. Just in terms of, it's pattern matching, actually. Yeah. It's watching for patterns and watching for those deviations. To wrap this up, we talked about challenges, we talked about insights. How do we simplify, see more, and act faster? Let's explore some practical steps together, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. What approaches genuinely reduce AI era risks, from data governance to integrated networking and security?
Absolutely. And I think we need to converge at a certain point of time, understanding how you're going to solve these complex problems. So I'll go for like the first one is the visibility, then comes the observability, and then comes the integrated networking and security. Okay. Let's expand on the visibility. We need to first understand like, how enterprise users are interacting with Gen AI apps and services, what their user behavior is all about that. Once you obtain that visibility, you get a gist of it, like how exactly my enterprise users behaving when we deploy these kind of AI apps and services. When it comes to observability, we map that problem entirely into the critical assets. For example, you can set up an entity and you can talk about, okay, this particular entity might be a user, might be your critical server, might be your LLM host, and all that, right? You can categorize based on the taxonomy you want to deploy. From there onwards, you can say, okay, these are the critical assets we need to observe. Observability goes deep into the context of how exactly that particular host is operating, like what kind of network is the traffic is being generated from it, what kind of traces is being left in the system when they're interacting with critical applications that are being running on those servers, right? And that actually gives you a better picture inside the environment, like with internal details that are being picked up, right? And that intelligence is very important. Third one is like integrated networking and security. What that exactly mean? See, at this present point of time, the world we live in, everything is like, mix and match, right? So you cannot say that I have like a one view of like networking and a separate view of security. Right. Integrated means like, whatever the network deviations that are happening and then actually tie up with like a security related deviations at a one go, that actually gives you a clear 360-degree picture. I'll give you a very simple example. You're landing on a dashboard, and then you see that, okay, my network is down. Here are the threat alerts that are happening. Here is the risk for that particular site. Everything at a one place. Then you go dig into it, right? And that integrated picture of security and networking gives you a better view. Right. So when we talk from visibility to observability to integrated networking and security through a one platform, I think that's the most important part, because CISOs now have like, okay, this critical assets, and now can see security, and now let's enforce policy in a uniform way if you can do it in all across.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Aditya, with your background, could you help our listeners understand what a unified SASE architecture means and why it's important?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we talk about the SASE Secure Access Services Edge and then we use the term unified, what exactly we mean by that is like, of course, you have an underlying network. You have a complete visibility into it, what exactly going through that network and all that. But can you enforce security in line with that network, right? So different set of security engines working at a different set of network and then working collaboratively to give you a better picture about, okay, guys, this network traffic we're seeing showing some deviation. And then you go more granular understanding like, okay, this is a security concern here and I can enforce policy. When we say enforce policy, we talk about uniform way of enforcing policy. You can create a one particular policy and then you can apply it all across your sites in an environment. If I dig a little deeper, like let's say Aryaka provides a lot of like a private network setup, right? You can create your own network setup for like AI apps and services, right? And then there onwards, you can apply security policies on the top of it. So you can say that in my enterprise, this particular environment is dedicated for AI operations, apps or services. That network is segregated entirely from your main network. And with Aryaka Unified, you can enforce policies, looking into network level threats, security and all that. And of course, performance as well. So all visibility you can attain from that, observability and enforce integrated security and networking policies in a one go. And it's completely separate, different backbone. So that's how we actually enhance when we talk about uniform. It's a one pass architecture. You network traffic is passed, is going to touch on a one point and all intelligence be embedded right there from different section variables and parameters that are defined based on the standard architecture. So that's where we say unified. It means complete visibility, observability, integrated networking and security.
Fantastic. Thank you. So now we understand what SASE architecture, a unified SASE architecture is. How does that simplify operations, improve visibility, and speed up detection and response?
Absolutely. As we believe the way architecture is designed, we call it as a one-pass architecture, right? Let's say consider a site has like thousands of users. So that particular network section part of it, when you deploy Aryaka solution for it, is like obtaining visibility of every single network transaction that is happening. User interacting with an application, user is like sending traffic, triggering scans, all those kind of things. Because it's our network, we own it. Or basically we have a full visibility into the network traffic. We can easily decipher the parameters that's specific to a user-centric entity and extract all the parameters, feeding it back into our one dashboard, right? And then what happened in that case, you have all the intelligence related to the users and any other entities, right? What is happening? So you get visibility. But on the contrary, from the observability point of view, you can also go dig into like critical assets because that's also reside in that particular site, or you can map into or you configure it, right? And then you get all the observability right there as well. But that is when we talk about, again, a one pass. It just touch at a one point, we extract the intelligence right there and force. On the similar part, we have several security engines from DLP to the WAF, SWIG, and all that, right? And that intelligence, what we extract from the network, feed into the security engines, and then they see what we need to do, right? And let's say an attack is happening. One touch point, it goes from your network backbone to there. We see that, okay, deviation is there. Networking parameters are extracted, like performance, everything is good. And then security say like, this is a threat vector, we need to stop. You stop it right there. That vector is not going to bypass your edge. Because the traffic's there, it isn't going to touch your server and all that, right? Because we saw it, we decompose it right there. And then all the intelligence from there, we have a bigger 360-degree dashboards and everything. You see that security networking in one page, risk score, all that, tree mechanism, threat intel is all there. So you can say like, a frustrated SOC guy comes in and say like, I'm not okay. And then say, I'm not going to look into it. But he just say like, open up into the environment. Okay, my site is like a 80 score I need to do. So you click on it, you get all the artifacts right there. And these kind of architecture is the demand these days. Right. And it is a need, I would say, apart from the demand, it's a need of the hour to go for these kind of architectures. Rather than relying on individual section of security enforcement, I think we need a bigger picture and a bigger sphere of how we actually solve this problem.
Perfect. Thank you. If an enterprise wants to see more, act faster, and reduce complexity, where do they begin?
I think from the perspective of the intelligence, I think they really need to dissect their environment into the component-based model.
Okay.
Every component need to be enforced with continuous policies and processes. and then they decide what kind of security related solutions we need to use for solving that problem that are mapping to a specific component.
Okay.
And I think that actually gives them the control in a very granular fashion, and then actually enforce it to apply policies which are much more effective in nature. And of course, you can actually go for a certain set of solutions down the lane, which provide you complete integrated networking and security in a one go, rather than relying on an individual set of things. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to deal with any kind of integration problems. Like 10 different solutions need to be integrated together to just give you some set of intelligence. If there is a big platform that resides there, gives you the better intelligence, they should go for it, and then build all that kind of intelligence across it, and then enforce strong policies to ensure that the security posture is intact, whether with respect to AI-based attacks or non-AI-based attacks.
I'm just going to follow up on one item. You mentioned policies, and it's a fast-changing world. Are static policies going to be good enough, or do we really have to be changing these up regularly?
I think, again, we're going to map it back to the kind of problems that you're solving. Static policies, like, somewhat are okay, but with the ever-changing dynamic environments, we need like a dynamic nature of this policy generation into it. And that is, we need more intelligence variables and parameters need to be fed into that policy generation. We just cannot rely on one standard heuristic, one standard signature to create policies, because we can't deal with like thousands and thousands of policies. So if you have that kind of intelligence where you can gather those parameters and feed it collectively back into that one policy that can be uniformly applied all across, that is the key. One example I always used to say with the unified SASE play, and why we see that, because we see visibility into different geographical locations. Let's say a threat that is attacking in a one particular location in EMEA region, right? And then you get an intelligence, you detect that attack, you got a features and all this stuff, right? Now you can use that intelligence, feed it back into the environment, into the US region, right? And then the policies can be enforced in a very fast manner. So distributed and scalability, these kind of platforms that actually help you to do that. Just imagine the intelligence from a one geographical location is being consumed to actually, subvert the attacks on the other side. And how fast you can do it, that's the way. And that's how we see, like, a convergence is needed from networking and security, and together you are going to save and protect AI.
Thank you, Aditya. I feel a little bit safer around AI now, and I hope our CISOs have gained something valuable from you today. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah, thanks, Ajay, for having me. Really appreciate that.